3. And here we are. Reena Friedman Watts of the Better Call Daddy podcast. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Of course, congratulations on 10,000 downloads you just celebrated today.
Yeah, that was really exciting because literally, you never know when that's going to happen, right?
Of course.
Yeah. And so I feel like from 1 to 5 was slower than from 5 to 10. And you really have to just kind of celebrate little wins along the way, right?
Absolutely. I mean, especially when did you start the podcast? I mean, it wasn't that long ago.
I launched August 1st, and on February 1st to the day, I hit 10 grand.
Yeah, that's unbelievable.
It felt really crazy and good. Yeah.
Great. Good. Now, that video you shared today, it looks like you got some snow where you're at.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So on my 5,000 downloads video, it was just full of leaves in Chicago and beautiful. I love autumn. And so I was like, oh, I want to take a walk in the yellow leaves and throw some up. And that looks really cool on video.
Yeah.
So then I was like, okay, well, we've got a ton of snow now. So let's see what throwing some snow looks like. And actually, that looks really cool too.
No, it was awesome. It was awesome. I've been listening to your podcast. I love it. I love the idea that you had of not only doing your own thing and interviewing people, but also getting your dad involved. I mean, was that the original idea when you first wanted to start a podcast, or is that something that developed along the way?
So that was part of the title and the idea, but I will say it took a little bit of figuring out the format. So in the beginning, I was like, should I have my dad on the call so that he hears it unfolding? But then I was like, no, because I actually want to edit the interviews down.
Right.
So it was better to, plus just time wise, to have him on every interview gets to be kind of taxing. So I'm into that part. He's better at just reacting to them. So he was only on, I think, 1 or 2. And then he was like, give me the edited version and then I'll react right after. So that's still pretty genuine because he calls me right after and I send him a Zoom link. And then we don't have any discussion about the episode until after I record him telling me what he thought.
Okay. And now we talked last time about the tedious editing process that you go through. And I've been kind of the more I listen, the more I'm curious. Is some of it so scaled down because you want your dad to be able to listen to the whole thing and digest it pretty easily?
So some guests repeat things more than others.
Okay.
And I will say in the very beginning, I was letting it be choppier than I am now. I think I have evolved a little bit, which was kind of the goal as an interviewer. So in the beginning, I did more sound bites than I'm doing now.
Right.
Where I wanted to ask the question more succinctly in the beginning. And sometimes when you ask a question, it drags on. So now that I'm getting better at asking things more succinctly, I don't need to restate the question.
Yeah, that's one thing that it does stick out when you're listening to the podcast, and then you can kind of hear that, your voice is different from the actual conversation. It's like, okay, she's clearly transitioning into a new topic here, and she wants to make sure you catch it. And it's pretty cool because especially this day and age. I mean, I don't know. There was this whole thing a while ago where they made a big deal out of what the average attention span of a millennial is, right? It's like 15 minutes or something, and then they whatever from there. So I'm sure you had that in mind, along with, like you said, just making sure, the repeats get taken out, all the ums like I do get taken out, and that sort of thing. But one thing that does stick out about the beginning of the podcast is I love the little song that your dad has you sing in the beginning. Is that something that obviously that's cut down to 2 lines? Is there a full song that may get released eventually?
It's really funny. So I had multiple versions of the intro before I picked that one. And yes, there were more lines to that were cut. And he's still like, when are we going to come up with a full length Better Call Daddy show? But I was just reached out to by this country singer. And I was like, look, if you want to come on here and tell your story, which I'm sure you have a great one, let's see your independent writing skills and see if you can come up with something country for Better Call Daddy. Because I'm from Kentucky. And if you do a good song, my dad will sing it with you. So that is in the works.
That's awesome. That's so awesome. So, as I just told you, before we started recording, my wife and I got wonderful news today that I'm going to be father to a daughter. Obviously, it's again, it's one of those things where, I mean, the last time I did a podcast just through Zoom, it was with a guy who he has a wrestling podcast, and it just so happened that my favorite overall podcast, Joe Rogan, had The Undertaker on, so the timing of that was funny. Now the timing of this is so funny with your Better Call Daddy, and obviously I'm going to be a father to a daughter. Um, so, what is it about your dad? Like, what are the dad qualities that you love about him and you wish every dad could be more like?
Ooh, that is such a good question. You've been asking some really good ones. My dad, he totally understands me because we have very similar personalities. So like he can handle me when my husband can't handle me, when a boss can't handle me, because he totally understands me. Just it's in his blood too. So he's really able to put himself in my shoes and not be judgy. And I've called him in many situations to test this. And he loves me regardless. Your husband, your wife is not going to do that. Your friends are not going to do that. You need somebody that thinks like you think and won't hold it against you.
Very true. Very true. Is there a particular like moment from your adolescence, like maybe prom night, for instance, that he gave you a particular piece of advice that sticks out?
That's funny. Prom night, I'm pretty sure he was waiting up for me in his underwear and the light on the sofa. I'm like, can you park down the street? Uh, advice. Let's see. I posted a question on my Facebook today about trust, where trust takes years to build, but only minutes to lose. That is a
Yeah.
Warren Buffett quote, but I will say that my dad very much believes that too. He's so much about integrity and doing the right thing. He says it's similar to what one of my guests says, like, doing the right thing is always right and doing the wrong thing is also always wrong, you
Yeah.
know? Um One thing that really sticks out about my dad growing up was every time we would get off the same exit on the freeway, there was always someone there asking for money. Always.
Right.
The same guy. I mean, it's like that in Chicago too, but he's like, "You know what? If that guy's in my path, if he has to ask, I have to give." And I swear to God, like he is the most giving person. I'm like, the amount of dollars that I've seen that man give, and I now too try to set that example for my own kids. So that's something I will always remember about my dad, and I think it's even a quality that I looked for in a husband because my husband is way more generous than me.
Yeah. That's funny. And it's, I hate to do the thing where you say something and then I tell a story that relates to me, but I'm about to do it. The other night I'm walking downtown and, I literally had a single dollar bill in my wallet and I'm walking past this one intersection and there's a guy, holding up a sign and he goes, "Hey man, you got a dollar on you?" And I lied to him. I'm like, "No man, sorry." And I kept walking just because I'm nervous about whipping out my wallet in front of total strangers. And so he's like, "All right, man, love you anyway." And then, I took like 20 more paces and I felt like a total piece of crap. Here's this guy, he's out standing on the corner and he says, "Love you anyway," after I just totally lied to him and told him I didn't have a dollar. So I couldn't help myself. I pulled my wallet out, I grabbed the one and I walked back to where he was and I gave it to him. But yeah, it is those sort of things that, don't necessarily test your character, but I don't know. It felt good. It's not like I, feel like some sort of almighty empowerment type of person, but just those little moments, like you said with your dad, it does say a lot about, who you are. Um,
I have a story just like that where I have a client who's much more religious than me. And I'm like, "Hey, I've got to shoot this weekend. If you don't mind putting in a word, I know you're praying anyway." And I was like, "God," I was like, "I think I need to put in a word this week too." I'm like, "Your prayers seem to be helping me out." And I was like, "I'm just going to like randomly open like Psalms and wherever I land, I'm going to say one of those." You know what I mean? That's like my kind of prayer.
yeah.
And I'm like literally taking the book off the shelf and getting ready to like have my holy moment. and the phone rings and it's a telemarketer asking for money. And like you, I'm like, I was getting ready to be holy. You interrupted my holiness, right? And I was like, can you call back? I literally got off the phone and then I'm like, dude, God just sent me a test. So I called back and I literally donated like that moment.
That's funny.
But my first reaction was annoyance.
Yeah, of course.
Like I wanted to be holy in my own way.
It's part of, I mean, it's part of, you know, if you have a good support network, I almost think that's part of how you're raised, is to be, not be a jerk, but be wary of situations like that, you know, and protect yourself and then help others, type of thing. So maybe that has something to do with it. But continuing with the dad theme, obviously, as Better Call Dad is the name of your podcast. I did listen to your episode with Romy Friedman, which
Oh,
was a lot of
cool.
fun. And obviously her last name is Friedman as well, but no relation.
Yeah, no relation. What's really interesting too is when we met, there was another RF also. There was a Robin Friedman, and we called ourselves the three RFs. And what was interesting too is that none of us were religious. And we kind of were like all exploring our roots, and we all ended up marrying Jewish, which is rare, you know, because
Yeah.
like none of us were like sure we were going to do that. Um, yeah, so I love actually kind of mixing in people that have been a part of my life for so long because the conversations with them go deep. Did you
Oh
see
yeah,
that?
for sure, for sure. And she was, I mean, it was one of those episodes where you could tell it was easy for you. You weren't pulling teeth trying to get something out of her. She just kept going and going. And that was, you love, as someone who hosts a podcast and you listen to others, you can tell when it's just one of those that's going to be good, you know?
Free flowing for sure.
Yeah.
But I also do like sometimes doing a little bit of research, kind of like you did, and just testing my interview skills.
Yeah.
Do you like doing that?
For sure, for sure. I think not only for me, because I will learn something new. I'll learn to really like the podcast, and like everyone I've had on the show so far, I continue to follow their shows. I share their shows. It's one big community that I really enjoy. But yeah, you can learn a lot of things, and then the person you're talking to is also very appreciative. Like, oh, you actually took the time to listen, rather than, you know, as nice as the link for link, the share for share things can be in our online communities. Like, it's pretty shallow, right? Like, you're not actually listening to each episode most of the time and things like that. So I like being able to sort of put the gleam in the eye of whoever I'm talking to, that I actually took the time to listen to their episodes fully.
Yes, I have to say that I have joined some of those Facebook groups that are like, "Hey, you know, drop your links." And then the moment you drop your link, they take a picture that they're listening to like the first minute. And then they're like, "Hey, listen to mine too." And I'm like, "That didn't feel good."
No, not at all. Not
I'm
at all.
like, "I think I want to get out of that group."
And so with Romy, you guys definitely shared a lot. It was very personal, very deep. And it hit me hard too, as someone who's now expecting. And she went into talking about postpartum depression, and that is something that I think, you know, is very significant after, you know, trying so hard to have children in the first place. um, would you be able to, you know, because you just never know what's going to happen in life. Let's say I run into a situation where we're starting to experience that as a couple. What advice can you give me as a husband, to maybe have some things to look out for, and ways that I could help my wife through that whole process, if that were ever to be a situation?
That is so nice of you to say. And that's really tough. And I have to say, like, even if I may have experienced some of those things, like, I'm in such a busy life and relationship that, like, I even say to my husband, like, I don't even think you would let me say I had that. Really?
Yeah.
Like, he's one of those guys that's like, shake it off. You know what I mean? Like how compassionate of you to really feel like that. And I love too that like you're like, I'm so excited. Like I feel like you're like such a sweet guy to like really want to experience things alongside her.
Thank you.
um my sister went through postpartum and I think she tried to shake it off. We're, you know, the Friedman girls tried to do that. um I think something to look out for would just be like, she told me she literally like had no desire to do anything. Like literally she was telling her kids to feed themselves,
Mm,
and like she didn't want to get dressed, she didn't want to get out of bed, like she had no motivation.
yeah.
Like I have days like, I mean, everybody is exhausted as a parent, right?
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
I'm like, well, I think I've felt like that before, but, weeks of that is probably not normal. Months of that, a year of that, you know,
Yeah.
how long can you put up with that?
No, that's a good point. That's true too. And then later on, was it her father or her father-in-law who ended up coming down with shingles? I think it was her dad, right?
I think it was her dad. Oh my gosh. And the way that she loved her dad. Oh,
And
she
then
loves both of her parents, but yes, the
and that
way
was
that she talked about him, yeah, that really got me too.
no, for sure, absolutely. I mean, later on, I teared up. I honestly started to tear up when she said that after her dad passed, because she didn't get to say goodbye the way she wanted to. But as soon as she said she sees him in her dreams, that was when I was like, okay, all right, you got me, you got me there. But
She's so real.
oh,
She's
for sure.
so real. Oh, I just love her. She is a special person. She is actually a friend that I can talk to like I can talk to my dad. Like she will not judge you. I've talked to her in very hyper states of mind.
You need that. You really need. I mean, that's gonna sound cliche, but especially in this day and age where it's easy to be an online friend, it's easy to see, oh, this person has a birthday today on Facebook. Let me just post happy birthday real quick, and that's how I appreciate my friend. But to have someone who you can truly count on for those type of deep conversations and talk about the things she was able to so willingly talk about with you, it's big. It's big for sure. Um, but what
Makes me
got me
want to
was,
call her now. Yeah, I was just going to say something to that point because I had someone who also was a guest. I don't know if you've listened to the Karen episode. Her husband tried to kill himself. He survived.
ooh,
Yes. And she recently reached out to me again, like you said, it creates a community.
yeah,
The people that have been on my show, I refer them other people. I follow up with them. I care about their life now. Like I feel like so entwined with them. And
right,
yeah, so she is now selling her house and she is going to take her son cross country and she's thinking about doing her radio station on the road and she trusted me to like really talk to about that. And I loved that we got to have a catch up, months later. I've now, I don't know if you've listened to the Sheena episode, but she went to prison for murder, even though she didn't commit the murder. She walked somebody into being murdered. I've now gotten her on 3 other podcasts, and I'm part of her Facebook group. Prison did not break me, and I'm following her journey online. The people that I have on my show, like I'm genuinely interested in their story and their life.
you've had some really impressive, amazing stories for sure, and people on your show. I've told you before we even started this, the last time we had our intro, that the range of guests you've had, it's so rewarding. Like, don't get me wrong, I love a good fantasy football podcast. I love a good, baking or arts and crafts podcast. That's a one niche thing. But to be able to experience so many different people and stories has really been beneficial to me and obviously for you as well.
Thank you. Yeah, it's funny because I definitely didn't have it figured out when
Yeah.
I came up with it. I was just like, I want to work on my interviewing skills. I want to showcase that I can put something together from start to finish. I love marketing. I love community building, kind of like Heather, where we met,
Yep.
And I call my dad every day for advice anyway. So let's share his wisdom with the world. And that's really how it came together.
Absolutely. And I was going back to Romy, I was really impacted by when she said, she was talking about her dad coming down with shingles and how because of that she was like banned from seeing her children in the hospital for a little while, and that sort of made her question her faith. You brought that up, what did you think about God at that time, because you both are, so I don't want to say so religious. I don't want to push how, your level of religion on you guys, but to hear that from, people who do have faith, to say, I really questioned, what I believed at the time, is something that I appreciate, that authenticity too, because there are a lot of people who just always say part of God's plan, and never really question it at all. And even if you decide at the end of your struggle, like she did, that it was part of God's plan to have all these misfortunes and then finally lead her to having twins, after having such bad luck, before that. I mean, that's another thing that's just really, as someone who's not even religious myself, I mean, I'm not necessarily an atheist, but I guess I'm more agnostic. Like, I just don't know, and I don't want to claim to know. But to hear authentic people who are religious who say, listen, I have faith, but I have questioned it, it's something that really makes an impact on me for sure. And I'm sure you've had moments too where you're just like, what the hell, God?
Oh my God. I literally, yeah, have said, what the F, Yes. But I will say I've had moments on the opposite spectrum of saying, wow, this could only be from above. I've had both. I can give it an example too. Like when I had a 3-pound baby, and literally, had I not gone in that day, the baby would not have made it. Like, that was a moment of, wow,
Yeah.
what did I do to deserve this? When I've had a friend that lost one that was bigger than the baby that, they took out of me,
Right.
um, actually weeks later. So that was really crazy. And there was an outpouring from the community that I'm in, bringing me food and helping me in the hospital. And when I felt betrayed by that same community, like when my kid didn't fit into the school where I was sending him, because I was sending him to an Orthodox Jewish school and it was like too much for us.
Hmm.
And when we left that school, I was like, wow, we've been at the school for 7 years and nobody asked how we're doing at a new school. Like they just like were like, okay, that didn't work for you. And I felt so just left behind there. But then when I had this baby, all of those people were bringing me meals.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, okay, maybe they're just busy. Like maybe, I'm not in their, in their circle anymore. So it's just they're busy and I shouldn't take it personal, but I did.
Right. And she talked
So
about how she spent you said she was she kind of chuckled at it when you said she was an investigative reporter over in Israel. But were you surprised? Because I was surprised by the news that, like, you're apparently supposed to sit in the back of a bus over in Israel when you're a woman. I mean, is that something that surprised you, or did you already know that?
So I had been to Israel a few more times prior to that trip, so I kind of understood the division between men and between men and women. Yeah,
Gotcha.
like I have walked down a sidewalk where a man has gotten off the sidewalk when I'm walking down that way. Like you're supposed to get out of each other's way. Like you shouldn't even be on the same sidewalk. So I've experienced stuff like that, but I was surprised when she was like, I am not moving. I have a hard time with confrontation like that. And I probably would have just obeyed the societal rules.
Yeah.
I kind of loved that she didn't.
Right.
I was surprised by that. And, you know, I have to admit, I may have played chicken a few times on the sidewalk, like to see who should get off. But yes,
That's funny.
that does exist.
Now, sorry for my very unsmooth transitions here, but the next guest I wanted to talk about, he was a convicted murderer who had written a book about his experience. And that was something that's like, wow. I mean, obviously, here's one of the ultimate sins is taking someone else's life. And then your title basically is like, I forget exactly what the title was, but it's like, I never thought I'd say I love you to a convicted murderer, right?
So the title was A Convicted Murderer Got Me to Say I Love You, because
Right. Yeah.
he
Okay.
told me the story of how, he's from an Asian background and that he didn't really ever say I love you to either one of his parents. Like it's just not something that they really did culturally. And I actually have a hard time saying it to my mom because she's just not very expressive in saying it. My dad says it all the time, but she has a hard time. She is just, I don't know. It's definitely a barrier. Um and after he told me about his time in prison and a buddy in prison telling him that he should say it and daring him to say it, I was like, wow, it took him like however many years in prison to get to that point. I should do it because I have the ability to, and my mom's alive, and like we're having a conversation about how important that is and how good it felt to have that relationship. And so right after the podcast, I called and I said it, and I don't even think it registered to my mom because like I never say it. Like she literally got off the phone like without even saying it back. But I was like, I did it, you know?
Well, and I mean, talk about perspective for someone who clearly had, a rough upbringing enough that, pushed him into a gang. The moment that obviously there were several moments, but one of them that really sticks out to me is when I think he was saying that his mom wanted him to apologize to his victim's mother, and he had said something along the lines of, "Would you forgive my murderer?" Basically, if they just simply apologized to you. And I was like, "Wow, talk about perspective there."
Yeah, that gives me the chills. That was a really interesting plot twist.
Oh, yeah,
And it is interesting that he reflected on that.
big time. I mean, I guess when you have all that time to yourself, that kind of leads into my next question: is are you someone who, especially after hearing his story, and you probably had a formulated opinion before that, are you someone who believes in the death penalty or no?
You know, no one's ever asked me that question. I have to say, I don't think I could flip the switch.
Yeah.
I don't think I could be the person to do it.
There's just too many stories of redemption.
Exactly.
No, and there's a lot of mental health that you'll just never be able to fix. And maybe someone who's that mentally unstable didn't even know necessarily that what they were doing or why they were doing it. And that's a pretty good reason for not executing them in the first place. But I just think there are too many stories of redemption, too many stories of wrongful convictions to be so cavalier about, capital punishment.
There was a woman who recently got the death penalty for cutting a baby out of another woman. That
Right.
is kind of hard for me as a mom of 4 to be okay with.
For sure. For sure. Yeah. Those are the ones that make you go, I guess that's the one that we can just sort of do that with.
I'm like, if somebody else is willing to flip that switch. You know what else is crazy? And this is a story that I still would love to book, but I went to summer camp with a girl who was brutally murdered. Like a girl who we had the same matching, bathing suits, and we went to Girl Scout camp together, and she was 12 when she was brutally murdered by 3 other girls, a 16 and 2 17-year-olds. It was a national story.
Hmm.
And I like still have pictures of us together from summer camp. We were like pen pals when that was a thing.
Yeah.
And her murderers are now out, you know? And, I think that the mom tried to appeal that or whatever, and they did get life sentences. They served 30 years, something like that. Um, I would love to interview her mother. And I never have reached out to her and been like, I still have letters from your daughter. I still have pictures of us together. Like that story stayed with me very deeply.
And that's just such a nuanced issue because part of you says, oh, that's their punishment for murdering someone is now they get to roam the streets and live life and go to Starbucks every day. And, so there's that side of you. And then there's the side of you that, like I was listening to your podcast, and forgive me, I forget her last name, but her first name was Janelle. She was brought into sex trafficking very innocently at first. And then I think eventually even became a recruiter. And now she is totally on the good side of things. She works for a nonprofit and is trying to expose all those sorts of things. So it's like, what do you do?
And the girls who did that in their very young years, they had horrible upbringings.
Yeah,
Their circumstances definitely contributed.
right.
And now in their 40s, I'm sure they're much different people.
For sure.
So yeah, it's a tough call. I'm definitely glad I'm not a judge, but I will say another story that I'm getting ready to release. And again, it was somebody who's been on my show, Megan. I went to college with her. She has 3 kids by 3 different guys. And I called her episode Dating Disasters. And she was asking me like, how do you find a good guy? She just got married. And so I'm doing an update story with the guy that she married. I think they met in 3rd grade.
Oh,
And they
wow.
reconnected on Facebook, and he just got out of prison after 15 years. He was part of the Aryan Nation.
Oh,
And I was like, how's it feel like to be talking to a Jew right now? Let's talk about leaving the Aryan nation.
Oh, you are making these transitions so easy, because that was exactly what I wanted to talk about next. You did have a guy who was a former member of the KKK on your show. You talked to him about his experience and everything that led up to that. And that's something that, it's big in the news right now, obviously, with the events that happened on, January 6th. We had the Capitol Hill riots. And I think that, again, it's such a nuanced issue. Were there guys a part of that who are white supremacists? For sure. Was everyone who was in that building a white supremacist? No. Is everyone who voted Republican this last time around a white supremacist? No. I mean, I think that's pretty obvious. But also, you know, let's take a look at why these people fall into this line of thinking. I mean, it's not always that, the Richard Spencers and the guys who are just so confident and can speak, eloquently and things like that. A lot of times it's just an insecure kid who has no identity at all and thinks that this new identity is going to make them tougher, and they find some sort of family, just like, you would in the Crips or the Bloods or whatever. So it's just falling into a gang mentality a lot of the time. And I'm not saying that we should give any leeway or any excuses to these guys, but I feel like when it comes to white supremacy, and again, this is weird, sort of being like a defender of it, but there's never that. It seems like there's never that side of it that we look at what drove this person to thinking that. It's always like evil, 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 and not, well, maybe they're just a scared kid who fell into a group that made them feel good. You know what I mean?
And both guests confess that to me.
Right.
Both guests. So you're on point 100% with that, is that they were both wounded little boys, and you enter prison and you either find somebody to have your back, or you better
Somebody's
watch your
definitely gonna have your
back.
back. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for sure.
And so actually when he was leaving prison, he talked about telling them that he wanted to leave, and three guys came into his cell and beat him up. He said, I'm lucky I didn't get stabbed on the way out.
Yeah.
But he said he didn't hate Jews. I don't know if that's true, but he did tell me that. And even the KKK guy, he also said that they both had been bullied or were lacking father figures, and were just looking for brotherhood, really.
Yeah.
Mentorship, somebody to have their back so they didn't get beat up.
And again, it's silly. I feel like I should, reinforce this idea. I'm certainly not a defender. I don't make excuses for people. I just say it's not as black and white as this is an evil person. Sometimes it's just a kid who is, like you said, had no support network, and all of a sudden that becomes their support network. So just to understand that, to have two things at once, to understand that this is a person who's made bad decisions, and if they continue to make bad decisions, call them out for it, but always understand there's redemption to that as well. People can be redeemed and talked out of things. I mean, and that's why I'm so grateful for that, you doing that episode with him. I'm so grateful for a guy like, I don't know if you have heard of Daryl Davis.
I haven't.
He's a blues musician who's been on Joe Rogan. He's been on Jimmy Dore, and he's famous for he's a black man, and he's talked like something like 200 former KKK and Nazi members into denouncing white supremacy. And once they've met him and spent time with him, they're just like, what the hell was I thinking? Like, I was just acting out of total ignorance. I basically was isolating myself in this silo where I wasn't even talking to people from minority groups or people who don't think the way I do. And now that I know a guy like Daryl Davis, I've come around to being someone who can be, a productive member of society and live amongst everyone else. And there's just too much of this line of thinking nowadays to where if you don't agree with me, then you stay over in your corner, I'll stay over in my corner, and we'll never have any sort of common ground. So again, thank you for that episode, because I think it was really big.
I read another story online today about this exec friend of mine that works for a cybersecurity company. And he was saying that it kind of goes along with what you were saying, that he cheated on a test and the teacher could have given him a 0.
Yeah.
But instead he said, I want you to rewrite it and not cheat. I want you to not care about making an A. I want you to care about the material of what you're going to learn.
For
And he
sure.
said he got a C plus, but he felt so much better about himself. And like you're saying, he got to redeem himself in the eyes of the teacher, in the eyes of himself. And it was, a hard-earned C plus.
And that's a good teacher right there. And it kind of actually reminds me of Heather Parody's group. I mean, Unconventional Leaders. Like that's a signal of leadership right there. When you have someone who can identify someone who's made bad choices and figure out a way to have them redeem themselves. So I couldn't agree more. And that's a great story as well. Another interesting story that you had was a survivor of Jeffrey Epstein. That was quite an episode as well. Obviously a lot of things I would encourage everyone to listen to your podcast in general, but certainly that episode, because I think Jeffrey Epstein is, oddly enough, a story that's gone entirely away when it comes to the mainstream media. I mean, talk about something that makes me wonder, who's pulling the levers and pulling the strings, when it comes to the big news outlets, not just CNN, but, Fox News and other outlets. So no matter who you listen to, it seems like that's been swept under the rug, even with Ghislaine Maxwell. But one thing that really stood out to me with that one was she thought one of her theories was maybe he had someone paid to kill him rather than someone, because I've gone this whole time with someone very powerful had him killed. I've never thought before that he would pay to have himself killed. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I am fascinated and disgusted by that story.
Yeah,
I think there was probably things she couldn't tell me.
of course, of course.
Yeah. That is a really interesting hypothesis. I definitely don't think it was an accident that he's dead.
I mean, if it's an accident, then the stars aligned to have, the guards not paying attention, the cameras were off, and all that sort of thing. I mean, come on.
And his cellmate is also now dead.
And he was an enormous man, an enormous killer of a man. I mean, could have easily, choked him to death like a rag doll. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind, but.
Exactly. And I also am shocked about the news not saying anything about Giselle.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about, nothing basically. I mean, there's the news, the main. It's going to sound so conspiratorial, but the mainstream media, I think, has definitely become, and forgive me for using this phrase, the lamestream media. I mean, they talk about so much irrelevant shit that could all just, be Facebook fodder. And there's so many more important things to talk about. You brought up the woman who was just executed recently, and I believe that was the first time a woman was executed since the 70s. I wonder how much play that got on, the mainstream news. And, like this Jeffrey Epstein, you would think would be one of the biggest stories of all time. I mean, this is a guy who knew just about every politician, had multiple powerful people on his planes at the island, clearly shady, circumstantial death, so many things that just don't add up. And for any real investigative journalist, you would think this would be the story of a lifetime. And yet here we are, almost hearing nothing about it. A year later, I forget now exactly how long ago it was, but it's just totally unmentioned. And it's just the strangest, most obvious thing to any normal citizen of what is considered news and what's not considered news anymore.
She was so brave to share
Absolutely.
that story because people have followed her, have threatened her. I mean, he ruined her life.
Yeah. Yeah. And not just him. I mean, people who have harassed her since then.
And I cannot believe the number of people that he ruined their lives.
Yeah.
That to me was astonishing. I mean, and there's so many that we don't even know about. And I will say something else about that. Since I have started my podcast, the number of women that have come to me in my DMs that have experienced abuse freaks me out.
I mean, on the one hand, you're like, okay, this is great. I have more guests. But on the other hand, I can't believe how often this is happening. That's what you have to be thinking.
As a mother of a daughter, I'm terrified.
Yeah.
And I will say that I spoke to a woman today that told me she went to a Rachel Hollis event, like an On Fire event. I don't know what it's called, a Rise event. And one of the parts of the event, was everybody got a piece of paper and they had to like say like, I was raped or I wasn't raped, I was abused, you know what I mean? And they all like wrote it anonymously and then they passed it X number of times. And then she said, I want all those who are holding a piece of paper that says I've been raped to stand up. Out of like 3 people or something, this lady told me that like 40 to 50% of the entire room stood up. Like the numbers are real.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is terrifying how often that happens.
And listen, I'm not going to take anything away from mothers. Obviously, you are a strong mother. There's plenty of strong mothers out there, but I believe, again, it's a sign that your show is called Better Call Daddy. I mean, just think about how much that plays into both sides of the equation. To have a father who protects you as a daughter and teaches you to stay away from predatory activity like that, and as a son, to have a father who is teaching you how to behave around a woman, both huge things.
Very huge, very huge. And I tell my kids, I'm like, do you know how lucky you are to have a good dad?
Right.
It is a tremendous blessing.
And you have 4 children, right?
I have 4 children. Yes. And like you said, I really like what you just said, to teach boys how to treat girls right. And also for a daughter, to see their mommy being treated right and how a woman should be treated. So, so important. And I also did an episode recently on how to talk to your kids about sex, because with internet today, they're finding out a whole lot quicker. The average is like 8 to 9 years old.
Really? Wow. See, I thought I was an early starter. Holy cow. I got nothing on that.
So yeah, I interviewed a sex ed teacher, and just to know like how to say things PC, and oh my gosh, there's so many things that you can interview people about. There was another girl that I know locally here in Chicago who was gang raped, and she developed an app called Fam Time. And it's also around the same subject matter, like how to detect that you need to have a serious conversation with your kid, how to not miss that, because she didn't tell her parents until adulthood. And I have a friend that came to me in the DMs after listening to one of my episodes. I went to school with her kindergarten through 5th grade. I was in her wedding. She got married at 17, getting out of her parents' house. She was abused all through grade school, and I did not know. Did not know. I had spent the night at that house. I knew her parents. I was in her wedding. No clue.
Yeah, that's insane. That's unbelievable. And it just goes to show how deeply it affects people to where they just shut down entirely, and can't even tell their best friend.
Isn't that crazy?
It really is. It really is.
She was the only girl in my class from kindergarten to 5th grade, and I had no idea. You would think that you would be able to tell something.
Too ashamed to even tell you, that says a lot.
We need to do better. We
Absolutely.
really, like, through creating this podcast and through the questions that I'm asking and the guests that I'm having, I am, becoming more vulnerable myself and opening the door to people who have trouble talking to, I don't care if they can't talk to anyone else in their life and they want to reach out to me. I literally have a guy who is from a Hasidic background. He's got 5 kids. He can't talk to his rabbi. He can't talk to his wife. He's told me things that he can't even tell his wife that he was ashamed about. And I was like, you know what? I'm never going to tell anybody.
Right.
If I could save their marriage, or if I could help him say things better, I'm honored that he thinks I can.
No, you should be. I mean, that's a lot about your personality. And I mean, it's got to be, people. We're both humble people. I feel like you and I, but to be able to toot your own horn a little bit on that one, be like, I'm cool enough to where this person wants to open up to me. It's got to feel good.
It happened today. His sister literally had a stillborn, and he was like, I'm one of X number of kids, and we're the closest in age, and we're the closest. He was like, I have no idea what to say to her. I was like, let me reach out to a grief specialist and let me reach out to a friend of mine who's also had a stillborn. I'm not 100% what to say on that, but I will give you what they say. And they both people responded to me, and I gave that to him, and he was like, thank you so much,
That's huge. That's huge. I mean, because that can lead to, keeping stuff like that inside obviously leads to depression, can lead to much worse, much worse. So to be able to open up to someone, it's huge.
And he honestly came to me from one of the interviews I did on my show. I did a 4-part interview on a friend of mine who was given up at birth. And I interviewed her adoptive mom, her birth mom, and her birth sister that the mom kept 16 months later.
Holy cow.
And the way that I spoke to the birth mom, he was like, I think you can help me with my wife.
Dang. That's awesome. I definitely got to check that one out for sure.
Oh, that one's a tearjerker.
Oh,
The
great.
birth mom is homeless. She's been abused. My friend who was pregnant at the same time as me, and we're friends here locally in Chicago, like arranged for her mom to be in a hotel room and got her earbuds for the interview. And she lives a much different life than her mom.
Yeah.
She was actually afforded a better life and education, and her 4 birth siblings lived completely on the other side of the tracks.
Yeah. Oh boy. Again, this is going to be one of those where it's like awful transition, but unfortunately I have to. Uh, you did another episode with, and I'm going to say their names wrong. I know I am. Is it the Chiodo or Kyoto brothers?
Chiodo brothers.
Kyoto brothers, yes. And I could tell how excited you were for that one because they were the first guys to hire you when you got out to LA. And I mean, they've had so many different projects from Team America to Elf to Killer Clowns from Outer Space. I mean, talk about a range of ideas on that one. But you've been involved in obviously media and entertainment industry for a while as well. You told me that you worked on the Springer Show, correct?
That was my first job out of college. Yeah.
What is the what is the process like for finding people to be on the Springer Show?
That's a great question. And people don't usually ask me that. I love that. So I worked at Springer when the 1-800-96 Jerry number was still in operation.
Oh man.
And so we used to get binders called carts full of people who called into the show. So the production assistant or the associate producer would call back each person that called into the show. And those were like gold to us. And another thing is, if you ever call that number and you leave a phone number, you will never get erased. They will call you for years. I mean, now they're off the air, but this could have changed. But when I was there, we would go through those binders and through those binders and through those binders because, we could do update stories. And if we couldn't make one of those stories happen when they first called, they might come together 6 weeks later, or they might know someone. Chances are, if you're calling the Jerry Springer Show, you surround yourself by Jerry Springer guests.
I think so. Yes, this is a safe assumption.
So that was how we booked the story. So usually the person who called in would then have to gather the rest of the story. So if it was a wife that called, then we would need to talk to the husband, and then we would need to talk to the mistress.
Okay. Now, obviously that show was one of the most entertaining of all time. People tuned in, like crazy, and people loved to be out in the crowd, and the crowds were always, juiced up and everything. What I sometimes think about nowadays when I watch, the older episodes, Jerry could be having like a legitimate conversation with those people, and then all of a sudden that boxing bell goes off, and we're right back to scrapping at it again. Was there ever a point where you were just kind of like disheartened by that, by how easily people were like manipulated into just fighting again?
You are an excellent question asker. Okay. The reason I left was because of that.
Okay.
After over 2 years of hearing those stories over and over, one of my guests, and I swear to God, looking back at this, I feel like it was a message from God. But one of my guests said to me, he said to me, how can you live with yourself? He literally said those words. And what's so interesting is I was starting to feel a little bit burned out from it anyway.
Yeah.
And the episode that he said that on, the executives loved the episode. They were so happy with the episode. They were like, good job, like, way to start the season. And I was like, I'm done. Like, I've had enough of this.
Yeah.
How many times can you wreck people's lives? I mean, even if they know what they're getting into, you're definitely button pushing.
For sure.
I was like, I can take these same skills and go to a show that's a little bit more redeeming where I'm not wrecking people's lives every day. Yeah. And so that's what I did.
And societally, I'm not going to make the equivalent because I believe they're two completely, different shows. But you have to feel that same way about a show like Cops, where, they're showing up and we're literally highlighting like the worst parts of each spectrum, whether it's the guy doing crystal meth in the trailer park or it's the guy who is straight up gangbanger, and we're literally portraying every single person on the show in that light, rather than where's the white collar crime, where's the guy who just gets pulled over after DUI from work. It's always just these crazy ass, let's go to the complete opposite ends of the spectrum episodes that just get the most views, and the train wrecks and the car wrecks that are. But
you're so right. And I actually know somebody who worked on that. And I know people who have done the ride-alongs. And I think that show is off the air because of, probably all of the tension that's happening today, but for the reasons that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Like, how long can you get away with doing that to people before somebody's like, that's not right?
Yeah, for sure. It's I always like to say that people are, should be personally accountable and you're responsible for your own decisions. However, to fan the flames, to always push society in that direction, to ring the bell, so to speak, and have people just go at it again, it's just not good. It's not good for society. But one thing that is good for society is the sort of the guest I'm gonna wrap it up here with a little bit. You had a dominatrix on for one episode. I would hate to spoil it, so if you could go ahead and give me your favorite part of that episode, and then I'll tell you mine if it's not the same.
Oh, when she said she was asked to kick somebody's teeth out, I was like,
yes, that was hilarious.
Yeah, did you do that? I don't know if I could stick on a steel-toed boot and do that, but I loved that.
That was great. And obviously your dad's assessment of it afterwards was also fantastic. Because he's so bureaucratic, right? He's gonna try to shine everything in a good light and be like, well, she's taking control of her sexuality and using it for good things and all that. So I just love your dad's analysis of each episode. But I thought it was so funny when she mentioned how the one woman had brought in a very nice sword one time, and the guy ended up getting cut on his penis. How funny was that?
I think that made the promo of my show.
They threw rubbing alcohol on it, and I could just I found myself in the room, as you guys were describing it. It was so hilarious.
I actually want to interview more people along the lines of that, and somebody just connected me to it. I think like a dominatrix tonight. I am fascinated by that world because I haven't really seen it.
Yeah.
So yeah, stay tuned. There will be some more of that action.
You did mention you were hoping to maybe sit in on a session or two.
I would like to maybe see that. There is Pornhub, but real life I think would be different.
Well, Reena, thank you so much. You've been such a wonderful guest and very gracious with your time. If you wouldn't mind, I know obviously we've been talking about the Better Call Daddy podcast, which is fantastic. Everyone, please take the time to go check it out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and basically anywhere else you get podcasts, right?
Yeah.
You also have your Facebook group, which is LinkedIn Laughs and Other Business.
It's Business Laughs and LinkedIn.
Okay, yes, that's also a good one. So please go ahead and find Reena on Facebook there. Is there anything else you'd like to plug? Any other projects or anything you've been working on?
You are so amazing. Let's plug you. Oh my God. I want to interview you after that baby comes, because that is going to just rock your world in such a beautiful way. Your whole life is about to change. So
yes, indeed. Very much so.
Yes. My baby is actually knocking right now. Should I put him on the camera? You can say hi.
Absolutely.
Okay, hold on.